How does one get treated differently based on how they look? How unfair is the world insofar as it privileges the pretty, praising them for actions ugly people would get hounded for? How do people with nowhere else to go and no way out get exploited by the rich and mighty? When you hear this, you might mistake it for the plot of some highbrow art film. But no, the themes I'm describing here are what Lookism is all about, or at least was in the beginning. Lookism was and still is one of the most popular manhwa of all time, being one of the first to get an anime adaptation and even getting a live action adaptation. Its cultural impact cannot be overstated. Stretching over 500 chapters at this point, Lookism has been running for over a decade and it shows no signs of slowing down or ending anytime soon. And as it goes for many series that have gone on for this long, change is inevitable. Lookism now is not remotely the same series as it was back in its humble beginnings. It has gone from social commentary and struggles of high school students to supernatural fighting abilities and gang war. But while some call early Lookism a slog to get through to get to the good part, the fighting, I propose the opposite. At some point, the author lost sight of what made Lookism so good, what made it so special. Now don't get me wrong, I don't hate the series at all, quite the opposite in fact. I still really like it and I'm invested in the characters and the mystery that is still preserved. In this video, I will explain what made me feel this way, why I prefer early Lookism to the Lookism of today, how I think the newer arcs are wasting the story's potential. If you enjoy these type of videos and want me to make more of them in the future, do consider subscribing and leaving a like. Naturally, we can start talking about Lookism, but first talking about its main character, Daniel Park. Growing up, he was bullied for being fat. Not being able to take the bullying anymore, he decides to move from the countryside to Seoul to start life anew. But what he didn't know was that he would wake up in a second, perfect body. The consequences of this are immediately noticeable. Seeing how much better he gets treated in his new body for the exact same actions he would do in his old body, he decides to use the new body to go to school and interact with his peers, while he uses his old body to make money at night. One of the things I really liked about early Daniel Park was his relationship with his mother and how he grew to appreciate her for what she had sacrificed for him. At the beginning of the story, Daniel was a bit of a spoiled brat and let his frustrations from being bullied out on his mother. However, as time went on and as he grew as a person, he realized just how important his mother was to him, working several jobs and running herself ragged just so he could live the best life he could. However, as the series goes on, it feels like this connection gets less and less important. I had hoped we would get more emotional moments between him and his mother, but as it stands, it seems rather unlikely that we will get more of it. Another thing that I looked forward to and that sort of disappointed me was his confrontation with Logan. Having been bullied by him for a long time, it was only natural that Daniel would develop a fear complex of him. Even when he was in his new body, one where he would theoretically be able to overpower him, still be afraid. And that was done well for a while. When he finally got around to his rematch with Logan, something that should have been a cathartic experience, it was honestly pretty underwhelming. Instead of being something that confronted Daniel with those emotions, it was just a one-dimensional beatdown. In general, the emotional writing in some of the earlier arcs is what initially drew me to the series. I will talk about some that really affected me later on in the video, but that sort of emotional storytelling is something that I feel got lost throughout the series. The biggest example of this is, in my opinion, Jiho. Throughout the early series, Jiho always felt like a parallel to Daniel, an example what could have become of him had he not gotten his second body. During the Homeless arc, they both got the same words of advice. If you want to survive in this unfair world, you have to fight for it by any means necessary. But while Daniel took it as motivation to work harder to achieve his goals, in no small part thanks to the loving environment he's experienced in his new body, Jiho did not take the advice the same way. Instead of working on himself, he turned to a life of crime, trying to achieve his goals by any means necessary. Another good parallel to Jiho is actually Duke. Both are looked down upon and bullied due to their social standing and appearance. Naturally, both want to escape that life, find friends who value them for what they truly are. Whereas Duke had his talents as a rapper to fall back on, something that let him make a name for himself, Jiho didn't have that same luxury. Jiho was, in my opinion, the best antagonist Lookism has had to offer. He was a perfect foil to Daniel, not physically like many of the other antagonists were, but psychologically. It was brilliant to see him evolve from just a hateable comic relief character to a real antagonist who genuinely was able to challenge Daniel and his beliefs. But that's exactly what makes the end of his arc even sadder. His actions landed him in juvie, which exacerbated his bad traits and made him even more ruthless. His return to the series was something I and many others had highly anticipated. However, by the time he was brought back, the story had moved on and turned into something that didn't have a place for a character like Jiho. With the move towards being a more action-focused type of story, it seems like the author didn't really see a way to properly bring back Jiho's storyline, and ended it unceremoniously, with Jiho dying after barely contributing anything to the story. But what was supposed to be a very emotional moment turned out to barely matter at all. A former classmate, even friend, died right in front of their eyes. Instead of being something that would challenge our main character's beliefs or actions, it was barely a footnote in their minds, being all but forgotten by the time the next arc had rolled around. But what I think is by far the most disappointing development in newer arcs, far more than anything else I've mentioned so far, is the lack of importance the second body seems to have in a story nowadays. I believe this is also why the moniker gangism has become so popular within the community. At the beginning of Lookism, Daniel Park having two very different bodies was at the core of everything. The theming, the story, and the message behind it all was tied to the difference between those two bodies, how people were treated differently based on their looks. Although it had the occasional fight in it, early Lookism was but so much more than that. The mystery of the two bodies, along with the presence of Crystal Joy, another person possessing the same gift, were the forces that moved the plot forward. But neither of these things seem all that important nowadays. With his training, his old body gets ever closer in appearance to his new body, to the point where there's not even a clear difference between the two anymore. And Crystal Joy has all but disappeared from the story. However, while I do think my criticism of Lookism, especially some of the later arcs, is valid, I don't want to just come across as a hater. I genuinely loved some of the earlier arcs, with them tackling some genuinely interesting topics and concepts. One of my favorite characters in this story has got to be Vasco. In my opinion, he's the epitome of what early Lookism was about. If I had to describe the themes of Lookism in one sentence, it would be, don't judge a book by its cover. And Vasco is the perfect example of it. For all intents and purposes, he looks and on the surface even acts like a total gangster, but beneath the tough exterior is a total softie. In his past, while he did not yet have the physical strength he has now, he still had strong beliefs. He did not stand for any bullying and wanted to defend the weak by any means necessary. Even when he was relentlessly bullied to take the place of the people he was defending, having his body permanently injured and marked with a permanent marker, he stood strong. However, while he withstood the humiliation and bullying, it left its marks on him. Not only on his body, for which he used tattoos to cover them up, but also his mind. He grew to be afraid of needles and any sharp objects resembling them. But through that incident, he also gained a lifelong friend and a conviction he would never let go of. Never let the weak get bullied and to get strong enough to defend them all by himself. However, while Vasco's tragic arc led to him growing a close bond with his friends, deepening his beliefs and convictions, Johan Seong wouldn't be quite so lucky. In my opinion, the cult arc is one of the most memorable and scary arcs the series has had to offer. Up until that point, the story was mostly contained to high school. Granted, a much more violent high school than most, but still, at the end of the day, it was just conflict between kids. However, the cult arc was a stark departure from that. Featuring our main characters having to escape the clutches of an evil cult, it really showed the limitations of what high schoolers could do, how much could be achieved with simple, pure strength. And at the core of it all is probably the single most tragic character in Lookism. Johan grew up in a devout Christian household, and although they were rather poor, they were happy for the most part. However, over time, Johan's mother gets lured into a cult by her pastor. Not only did it show that he should trust no one around, as that trust had been betrayed before, but also that adults can and will misuse others for their own gain. However, worst of all, his mother had a chronic eye illness, slowly turning her blind, which is something he has inherited. And although this was something that could be cured, the only way to do so would be a very expensive eye transplant, something that he cannot afford at all, and he's trying to be able to afford at all costs throughout the series. Even though Johan is one of the most gifted and strongest fighters out there, throughout this arc he has to realize that there are things that he just cannot solve with his fists, and that harsh reality hits like a truck. However, if I had to pick one arc that showed why, how much I loved Lookism, it would be the Stalker Arc. It was hands down one of the creepiest arcs I've ever read, and it posed some real hard-hitting questions regarding Daniel's two bodies. Many of the earlier arcs that with the advantages became feeling pretty and famous, but there's also a dark side to it that hadn't really been explored up until that point. The more beautiful you are, the more famous you become, the more fans you will accrue. Although most are respectful of the person and their boundaries, the more fans you have, the more likely it is for someone to ignore those boundaries. That's exactly what happens in this arc. Someone gets obsessed with Daniel to the point they would stalk him, take secret photos of him, and with that find out his deepest and darkest secret, his two bodies. Daniel gets kidnapped, and although he does get rescued later on, the whole ordeal leaves a permanent mark on him. He'd been too careless with his secret to the point where someone found out about it. And this arc is honestly something that it's pretty close to home. With the advent of YouTube and Twitch, we're so much closer to our celebrities than we used to be. No wonder then that we are so often from parasocial relationships with those content creators. And this arc showcased the worst of what could happen in such a case. All in all, I would still say I really like Lookism. The art has improved drastically throughout the years, and I would be a liar if I didn't also enjoy some sick fight scenes from time to time. And if there's one thing that has to be said about modern Lookism, it's that the fight scenes are some of the best drawn ones I've ever seen. However, and that is what I ultimately wanted to say with this video, I do miss early Lookism. Series focusing on martial arts are a dime a dozen, but what Lookism did was truly unique. It took a look behind the curtain of society, talking about topics many other series were simply too afraid to tackle. With society's propensity to favor beautiful people, the dangers of religious cults, or the perils of show business, it offered so much insightful commentary. And yet, even while doing all that, it maintained a wonderful cast of characters, each with their own goals and ideas, clashing against and working with each other. I will obviously continue reading Lookism to the end, should it ever end, but a small part of me is mourning what we have lost. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and see you next time.